Let me introduce the first invited talk. And this will be the talk of Stephen Bird on centering the speech community. Well, as I've mentioned in the beginning of my speech, most of NLP practitioners may not even know about the field work. Well, with the works of Stephen Bird, this is not the case, definitely. For example, he created the Natural Language Toolkit, and that's probably what everyone starts with when learning NLP. Still, Stephen Bird has made a huge impact on the whole field of field NLP. He works with the non-mainstream languages, correct me if I'm wrong, but mostly in Australia. He has lots of insightful ideas on how to work with communities and how to build actual products for the communities. And it will be our very pleasure to listen to his talk on centering the speech community. Please, you're welcome to share your screen and your expertise.
Thank you, Ofer. Thank you very much for organizing this meeting and for inviting me to speak. It's nice to see several friends and colleagues here in the room. Particularly note David Urowski, who, when I saw him at ELREC in Marseille, commented on what a luxury it is to work on just one language, since he's mostly working on 1,000 at a time. I keep thinking about that. This is a luxurious thing in our field, to take time to work on one language. It's obviously a feature of field linguistics and how that has worked over the last century. And so today I want to share some reflections under the title of Centering the Speaker, and invite some discussion of these topics during my talk and also at the end. So in the middle, I'll stop for see if people have any comments already, because I'm keen to have some participation. I'm delivering this talk from Kaurna land in Adelaide, in the south centre of Australia. This is land which was not ceded to the white people who arrived 250 years ago. And there are people here still speaking this language, which is a feat of resilience in the face of the threats they continue to experience. And that's just a reminder, I guess, that we interact with communities that are under various kinds of threats that are larger than the projects that we bring. All right, I would like to share my screen. Let's see how we go. I want to identify I think this will do the trick. Can you see my slides all right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay. So the story so far in our field, I'd say over the past century, linguists have been developing practices for working with speakers of little known languages, leading to linguistic description and analysis. So that arrow represents a flow of information, you could say. Linguists have generally captured careful speech. They've encouraged informants not to code switch. It's typical to collect narratives, i.e. monologue. Often it might not even be narratives. It might be words in isolation or elicited pairs of words, for example. There's been a tendency to favor the ancestral code over the emerging code. We like to find older people who speak the pure language. The result is the Boasian trilogy of texts, lexicon, and grammar. So this is probably the induction that we've all had into field linguistics. But in a moment, you'll have a chance to disagree if you wish. By the 1980s, computational tools reached a level of maturity that they could be applied to key tasks such as lexicography and morphological analysis. and these tools could be integrated into the descriptive workflow. We, quote, help the linguist to organize their data and ensure its consistency. A pioneer in this work has been SIL, International Summative Linguistics, with Shoebox, Toolbox, Flex, We Say, Say More, and so on. But many others and many people in this room have been participating in this approach. This is a picture where we center the linguist. With the rise of documentary linguistics, computational support has shifted, partly because we see that there's too much data to collect. And so we can help the linguists with their scaling problem. So we use computational support to capture and transcribe as much data as possible. I've drawn the arrow to the computer scientists via the linguists because even though we might include speech data that the linguist did nothing with, the linguist is still often the interface. It's the linguist who we give a tool to, and they are the interface to the community. And then they annotate some of that data with transcription, and it comes to us. You could call this leveraging the linguist as opposed to helping the linguist or harvesting the linguist or something. We leverage the linguist by having them transcribe and annotate sufficient data for machine learning. We promise technologies like speech recognition and machine translation for all languages. In the process, we've bought into a belief that the world's linguistic behavior is broken down into these distinct languages that the linguists choose to study. Each language, in the linguistic view, is a bounded denotational code with its lexicon and grammar. Excuse me. This belief suits the scientific study of language as a lexicogrammatical code, but I don't think it aligns so well with our interest of making technologies that are a good fit with day-to-day language use. But never mind, we're getting the data for free. The linguist's practice of transcribing speech into text in order to work with it fortuitously aligns with our preference in NLP of working with text. The logical next step is to bypass linguists altogether. As we move away from supervised learning, we see speech communities directly, not through the eyes of descriptive linguists. In this picture, we center the computer scientists. And once we deploy language technologies, we have direct access to language as it is used by people day to day. We find variation, code switching, hybrid languages, dialogue, orthographic variability, and so on. I don't think we're at this picture yet. I think it's just maybe part of the aspiration, artificial general intelligence, perhaps. So field linguistics is strongly motivated by securing the data for science while there is still time. Each language represents a typological data point. For example, if we didn't discover Hickscariana of Mexico, I think it's Arawakan language, so it must be further south actually, maybe Brazil. If we didn't discover this language had object, verb, subject, word order in the 1980s, linguistic theory would be having to explain why OVS word order was impossible in universal grammar. Thankfully, we discovered it, and now we have a different challenge perhaps to explain why it's less frequent. This hunger for data has not changed, even though the driver might have been shifting from linguists to computer scientists. But maybe we've lost sight of something. Meanwhile, local languages continue to be under greater pressure than ever. I think this might be no coincidence, for language vitality is an indicator of local agency. And the menial engagements required by machine learning are just the latest in a long line of threats to local agency. Have we delivered on the promise of that triangle of going language technologies back to speakers? In this era of language endangerment, many linguists have been creating documentation with the hope that this will preserve languages. It has certainly preserved languages in archives, but has it sustained language use? According to UNESCO, the existence of language resources is at the bottom of the list of 9 factors used for assessing language vitality. So we make these resources, but do they do anything? In this era of language endangerment, computer scientists have been promising language technologies that will save languages. This work has certainly captured languages in models, but has it achieved anything on the ground, e.g. in terms of sustaining speech communities? I want to ask, where are you in all of this? I mean you personally in your work. In a moment, I'm going to invite discussion, so please think if you'd like to say something. I think some of us are here helping the linguist. We've signed up to the scientific agenda. I've spent a long time doing this too. So here's an abstract from 1999, last century. I'll just let you read it. So the yellow bit here is saying, basically, your dreams have come true. The rest of the abstract. So the green is saying, look, we've got data and theory. The blue is saying there's software and a corpus. And the yellow is saying, oh, and by the way, your dreams have come true. So that's 23 years ago. I can't believe I've still been saying these things because I don't think it's actually come true. In any case, in my case of helping the linguist, I didn't get beyond data collection and tone analysis of artificially constructed phrases. And I found that linguists weren't so interested in the computational grammar because it was not accessible to them, and I couldn't implement the higher level principles and constraints that they wanted without forcing linguists to be explicit in ways that didn't interest them. To put it bluntly, I was saying, let me help you, and they were saying, we don't need your help. And even supposing I was successful and made some useful software, the result would have been linguists constantly asking me for new features. Some of us might be here, leveraging the resources created by linguists into language technologies. If the linguist has done enough work, we just need to convert their data, texts, and lexicons, maybe a grammar, into machine-readable versions and get on with the job of making language technologies. However, this picture leaves out the fact that we adopted the linguist assumptions, e.g. that language is a bounded code, that monologue is the dominant use of language, that people don't mix languages, that old ways of speaking are preferred. As soon as we deliver language technologies to real speakers, we discover that they do not respect linguists' idealizations. This picture also leaves out the fact that we don't have enough data. This is a field methods meeting today, so we're talking about collecting data because we don't have enough of it. So the technology will be low quality because we don't have much training data. And so instead, we've often focused on clever ways of harnessing speakers and linguists and doing more with less. This theme of doing more with less has become widespread in the low resource scenario, and I've done it too. For example, here the idea was to get speakers to create bilingual aligned audio using the iComma app. The source audio on the top was phrase aligned to spontaneous oral translation. And we used phone recognition on the source and word recognition on the target, and then did alignment. This got bilingual data, but it didn't take seriously the fact that younger bilingual and bicultural people who were good translators did not know the vocabulary used by older speakers that I'd recorded. Nor did it consider that the younger speakers' use of English or the contact language, whatever that was not a variety that was supported by word recognizers. Moreover, this didn't get far enough to deliver language technologies. In other words, the language technologies arrow on the right side of this diagram was an exaggeration in my case. It's still often an aspiration. Perhaps it's just how we like to talk about our work. I think it's fair to say we still haven't had many success stories evaluated in terms of technology uptake on the ground. Who is maintaining tools that are in active use by speakers? We're mostly evaluating our work according to our own measures, like word error rate. How about a measure such as sustained uptake? That's too hard, and it's not our job. We can't be expected to convert our prototypes into real technologies and support them. Plus, there's another issue, a possible mismatch. For example, we might offer machine translation to people who are not confident with text entry. They may need basic technologies like predictive text and spelling correction. Perhaps they already have plenty of bilinguals who can translate. In fact, this is the norm. After all, speech communities tend to have a local vernacular language and a contact language or trade language for communication with the outside world. Remember, we are no longer in the age of discovery. Colonization and mass media means that everyone in the local community knows someone who can translate for them. So just to be clear, the local community probably does not need machine translation. Do we talk to them about what they need? Or do we train them to be NLP researchers? Finally, some of us could be here, or at least aspiring to this. We've replaced the field linguist with a computer scientist, or rather, a computational linguistic robot, which can discover and learn language without overtly doing linguistics. We're just simulating humans at this point, and we've left field linguistics far behind. So what about you? What are you doing? Are you a linguistic software engineer helping the linguist? Are you a supervised learner harnessing the linguist for the labels they can give? Or are you the unsupervised learner working it out for yourself, simulating the linguist? So, like I said, I would like to invite some discussion. I know it's the morning for some people, or very early morning for those of you in Moscow. But please don't be shy. I'm going to unshare my screen for a moment. And let's see, does anyone have any comments about what I've said so far?
Well, I probably do. I wonder, when talking about all the, even if we say it impact, all the impact that our advancements could potentially provide speakers with. What if the speakers community has no interest at all in our findings? So should we consider our work as a failure or not? And what should be the guidelines to, like, should we proceed? Should we bury it? How do you think? Well, given this ranking.
Yes, so you could say what you're describing is probably the classical field linguistics scenario where a linguist, maybe supported by computational methods, is doing work with a language that is not interpretable locally. They might be interested in some morphological phenomenon, say, and maybe they can explain it to people, maybe they can't. It doesn't matter. The people are just a data pipe, and this is science. Who should expect the content of the science to be accessible to the objects being studied? It doesn't happen in medicine, for example. If someone is taking biological samples from us, do we ask them to explain to us in full detail what it means? So I think we can say that's one position, that there's no expectation for the participants of linguistic fieldwork to be able to make sense of the work we do. Did I paraphrase? I think I just want to leave that there as a position rather than respond to it, but I want to make sure I expressed it well.
Stephen, this is Lane. I'm in Alaska, so it's getting close to evening for me. I've got my fire going, and this has been absolutely beautiful. I just wanted to say thank you for summarizing so well what we've been doing and trying to do. I certainly recognize what I'm doing in a couple of different points on your chart. And I unfortunately have to agree that even though, despite my best attempts, it's probably more accurate to describe where I am in terms of success on that as aspirational than actual.
Thanks, Lane. Good to hear that. And I appreciate your honesty. That's where I am too. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I feel like those aspirations could actually deliver one day, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I didn't make out what you said. Can someone come closer to the microphone, perhaps? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
No, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for the presentation. Indeed, you mentioned very quickly at the end that we do need to eventually train community members to replace the outsiders, for them to be the computer scientists working on it, hopefully the linguists working on it. I have seen when community members are trained to do this, they are interested in many of the same technologies. For example, ASR is something that interests community members a lot. But when there's no community members involved, they do ask for things that can be immediately helpful, like predictive keyboards is something that we dismiss as too simple, and yet it can be transformative in its impact. My question to you is, what are your observations about not only how can we attract community members to do this work themselves, but how does it change the discipline when they are the ones directing the work?
Thanks for your question. And sorry, I didn't get your name. Can you please say?
Sorry, I'm Rolando. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you. Thank you for that question. Please. Yeah, so I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is that the community members who maybe begin with an Indigenous language and end up participating in the NLP community, they represent a very special subcase of community. And I don't know if there are any Indigenous community members in the audience today, are there? Because
I don't think so, unfortunately.
Okay, so I don't want to speak for Indigenous people. All I can do is reflect on my own experiences in a few places where people who've come through the education system left the village at an early age for education and participated in Western knowledge practices that included literacy. And so it's maybe not surprising that they respond to some of the technologies that we offer connected to that, such as speech recognition. I want to ask, what about the rest? And what's meaningful on the ground for other people? So when we say centering the speaker, let's think about a diversity of speakers. Even so, I also don't want to assume it's homogeneous. And so when I say centering speakers, it could be that there are many different positions, even amongst the one linguistic community. And so there's a diversity there, which makes it extra hard for us to talk about.
Yeah, thank you. Does a case of things that you think wouldn't matter, something that happened to me last week, we're making a predictive keyboard and we misplaced 2 characters that you need for WhatsApp chat, just to make the letters like fun and interesting. And that was the thing that they picked up on and that we're gonna have to correct. And of course, like as NLP people, this is the last thing that would cross our minds. And yet technologies that enhance human to human communication, that somehow connect community members, seem to have a very positive impact. And there, in my experience, there have been ones that generate quite a bit of interest.
Will you be presenting that work at this workshop?
Not at this workshop, but I can tell you more about it later.
Yeah, would you mind just taking a minute now to explain the context of what you just did?
This is in Costa Rica. I work with a couple of languages from the Chibcha family. They, like I've been doing mostly like speech recognition and a couple of things with like machine translation embeddings. But yes, as you said, these are things that the communities are not interested in. And just to connect with the previous question, our goal for the next decade or so is to make it so that community members are making some of these tools, for example, the predictive keyboards and so forth. And we are deploying keyboards for a couple of the languages and testing them on school teachers, which, as you know, as we know, they're the people who help us the most, but also the busiest people on the planet. They have very limited time to help us. And, you know, again, maybe because of what you said, they are an unusual combination of people who love literacy. So even they, though they represent a big voice in the community, are not going to be speaking for the whole community in their interests. But they do care enough to be chatting all the time, and apps like WhatsApp, they picked up on things that we were missing.
Yes, fantastic. Well, it's so nice to hear about that work, and it's incredibly important for our fields, and I feel like it's not sufficiently recognized. Probably what gets most recognized is the deep learning work and collecting data for everybody, but actually talking to people on the ground, which is what you're doing. Like, we need to hear more about that. And I hope that this conference will be a series of workshops where we can keep hearing more about that type of work you're doing in future.
I mean, there must be a way to do both things. There must be a way that the models that we use can help to, you know, build a better language model for something like the predictive keyboard. There must be a way that the data that we can become employees to people in the indigenous communities who need specific tools like transcribing. I mean, frequent case study, like traditional stories get recorded and they need them to publish textbooks in high school. This is something where ASR would actually come in handy. Yeah, there must be applications that the community can seize upon for every one of these. We just have to get not only creative, but ask them how to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something I'm going to come back to later in my talk. How do you get an alignment between a task that makes sense and meaning locally, as well as makes sense and meaning externally? And there's two extremes. One you just mentioned, computing in the service to local community, where they, you know, in the extreme version, they hire a computer scientist to make something they want, and then once the work's done, the computer scientist goes away with nothing because it was work for hire. And that is flipping the tables on the traditional field linguistics construct, which is the local speaker does work for hire that means nothing to them locally, and the linguist goes away with the data. Maybe they some employment.
I know we've got to switch that around somehow. But yeah, no, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure there'll be other people now wanting to say something. Let's just take a moment, have a think.
Hi, this is Lori. I'm in Pittsburgh. Okay. I guess it's striking that you mentioned that having language resources is 9th on UNESCO's list of things that are important for language vitality. But what if that's all I can offer? So we have, I have a new NSF project. We're trying to automate interlinear glossing in an end-to-end system with speech recognition, morphological segmentation, underlying forms of morphemes and glosses. The people doing the interlinear glossing that we're training on are native speakers with degrees in linguistics. And maybe I can let them decide how they're going to I mean, I can offer them an end-to-end neural system. I mean, that's what I have to offer, but they, you know, I can't decide for them how to use it in revitalization.
Yes. Thank you for that, Laurie, and it's good to see you.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to sit here and find fault with the way different people are doing their work. I'm simply, I suppose, being a bit provocative and asking or inviting us to continue reflecting on what makes sense in the best possible way. And that'll be different in different places and for different people. And we can also assume people are adults, vote with their feet. They can make choices for what they want to do. Paid work is good, even if it's not producing something that they use. And maybe it's for instance, in a transcription task, somebody is enjoying experiencing the content, even though they're not that attached to the task. The content is interesting. So
Yeah, they say that they want to use the stuff in language instruction.
right.
And maybe
Yes.
while they're annotating interlinear glosses and segmenting their morphemes, maybe they'll have some ideas, and then maybe they'll have a resource that
Yeah.
they can use in language instruction.
And something else I see going on there is that people discover how much they know. And that can be a point of pride and resilience. And teaching that in places where I work, it's not usual for the outside white person to be learning. And they're just like, it's refreshing for local people to experience the role of teacher rather than learner. Yeah, so it's kind of honoring their knowledge and maybe building their capacity. Yeah, cool. Thanks. Any other thoughts from people before I continue?
Hello, I'm David.
Hi, David.
Yeah, I'm talking from Paris. It's 3 a.m. here. Yeah, so first, thank you for this bunch of really sobering ideas. I think it really helps us to try to reflect on our real place on on the pipeline you have described. I wanted to say a couple of words in defense of machine translation. So, of course, the question whether the community needs machine translation is legit, and we always have to ask ourselves for whom is our work. Do anyone really needs what we are making? But as for machine translation, I feel that it's kind of driver for many other NLP technologies and other technologies attached to language. So in the large scale, what we see in the whole NLP field, this transformer revolution that made many technologies much better working started with machine translation. And I feel like it's been this way long time before. So it's machine translation what creates such technologies and what makes them available for new languages. So even if there is no immediate impact, I think it's something like building ecosystem for other people to come with something even more practical.
Thanks for that, David. Yes. In other words, it's a bit like pos tagging of old. It's like nobody would criticize pos tagging to say that's useful for speakers, but it's like a component technology that we need for down the track. And yeah, okay. Yes. I agree. In other words, we don't require that every component makes sense, just that it leads somewhere, potentially. That's the story. Yeah. Okay. I can, maybe that corresponds to another diagram, or maybe going back to my triangle. It's just to say we have to step back from the details and to say we're building this thing using the linguist data, and one of those technologies is MT, but it's unfair to criticize that in isolation. Yep, I agree. We're talking about a big picture where ultimately the contribution we make is useful at the local level. And that's not an axiom of field linguistics. That was never there at the start. We were doing science, getting the data. So it's a recent thing, maybe part of a decolonization agenda, part of the recognizing the socio-political situation of linguistic groups, that there is a moral or ethical obligation to not just take. Okay, so let me continue my presentation. Thank you for those ideas, and I would love to hear more. I probably have too much for the rest of this time slot, but let's see how we go. Let's talk about the speech community. I think we like to think about linguists or computer scientists and who's driving things, but I want to think, why do we assume our technology would be useful to the community? In particular, our practice of language modeling. That seems to be the thing par excellence right now in our NLP practice. Large amounts of data leading to large language models. What's the basis for believing that replicating human linguistic performance in a machine is useful? I think it's because we value efficiency and saving labor for humans. But this is not a universal value. In other places, people value agency and participation. Let's look at linguistic fieldwork in a different light. Linguistic field methods have long been a way of working across cultures. Most classically in the monolingual demonstrations of Kenneth Pike, where you use objects and actions to elicit speech from somebody where you have no language in common. That's a way of working together without a common language, in that third space in the middle of this Venn diagram. This is quite a general idea. So on the left, we have local knowledge practices, which might make no sense. We have no cultural induction. We can't make meaning of that. Just as local people don't make any meaning of Western knowledge traditions that involve going to libraries, reading books, writing. In this space, in the middle, we can ask, how do we work together effectively? And how do we use technology to support working together effectively? So let's consider the collaborative practice of dictionary making. What I've found is that my work on the right is an endpoint focused task. It's TLIC. I care about the end result, the dictionary. I measure things like how many entries does it have? That's a long-term process. It can take years. On the left, I find my local participants are not attached to that future milestone of a book on a shelf or a published resource. They care about day-to-day knowledge practices. For example, they like to discuss words and their layers of meaning. People get into that. They go home at night and talk to others about it and come back the next day with new information. These two practices work together well. That external work is funded and it provides daily meaningful employment for local people. And they have a choice. They can do that work, or they can do ranger work, work in the clinic, various other things. This is just work that affirms their knowledge more than the others that they get to choose. Sometimes that work involves getting in a truck and driving to a place where we can talk about those words and the associated practices. At the local level, 3 generations are implicated. The parent generation is being employed to do the knowledge work, and they are mindful of what knowledge they need to pass on to their children, particularly ecological knowledge. And they refer to the grandparent generation for their expertise and memory. There's nothing particularly radical here. It's just the flow state for resource creation. But how do we support this computationally? Let's take another example of transcription. Here I am transcribing with Bulan Din Yababuk. He has no particular interest in rendering speech into text. It's completely menial. Imagine asking an eminent knowledge holder for help transcribing their speech. Just literally imagine you go to a talk by some famous person at your local university, and then you try to engage them to transcribe their speech word for word. It's almost insulting. They would want to talk about the ideas. So here is Bulan in his comfort zone teaching me. We're in the oral space and focusing on the ideas. Could we combine these? So here's what I've been trying to do under the label of sparse transcription. Normally we assume dense transcription. It's the agenda coming from linguists. However, here, the thing that people like Bulan want to talk about are the main content words. We can do word spotting to find utterances that contain them, and then we can confirm, is that the intended word or something different? And then we can update the lexicon. We can find more instances, and the loop goes around, and we get denser and denser transcriptions over time. But this doesn't necessarily lead to the conventional kind of transcription that we know and love. And so I'm asking, why do we want to transcribe? One reason is because linguists do. For example, here's David Jukes. If you do time-aligned transcription, you will be able to search across an entire corpus of annotated recordings and bring up relevant examples. Or Nikolaus Himmelmann, the importance of the edited transcript resides in the fact that for most analytical procedures, it is the transcript and not the original recording which serves as the basis for further analyses. Or Ulrike Mosel, for the scientific documentation of a language, it would suffice to render all recordings utterance by utterance in a phonetic transcription with translation. Or Alexei Michaud, linguists should aim for exhaustive transcriptions that are faithful to the audio. Mismatches result in high error rates down the line. Or do we do it because of NLP? We've got a pipeline that starts with word sequences, and we just want to bolt on a speech front end and continue as before. I want to say these are not good reasons for transcribing fully and densely. To see why, let's consider a comparable situation. Here's an elder with historical knowledge. Presumably, she's naming individuals and talking about them. She probably does not mention everyone, just the ones who are significant or relevant. Well, hopefully. Enter a computational field linguist who's been working on automatic transcription and thinks they can help with using image recognition. What's the correlate of phonetic transcription here? Well, it would be visual features. Okay, so let's ask this elder on the left to describe the faces of everyone in the family photos. Describe the shapes of their eyes, the shapes of their noses, and so on. Can you imagine how insufferable this would be? This is effectively what we do. Making people transcribe is unkind in many places. For example, when Michelle says linguists should aim for exhaustive transcriptions that are faithful to the audio, that exhaustion is for the people. Or when David Wilkins says, transcribing is a much less popular task than recording, and people who collected tapes were often not available to help transcribe them. That's been my experience. And I'm just looking in this this book I've been reading from 1953. It's called Greener Fields: Experiences Amongst the American Indians by Alice Marriott. And she says, linguists' informants wear out soon and die young as a rule. That's confronting, but let's ask why is our practice so insufferable for local people? And look at me here then. Back in the third space, when we're doing transcription, we can drop our early attachment to transcribing everything and focus on the content words, the words whose meaning needs to be processed deeply, and then transcribe these wherever you find them using sparse transcription, and use this for word spotting. You can use this to find spoken documents which contain topics of interest because you're good at recognizing particular words. It's entirely analogous to the grandmother showing the photos. You want to learn to spot the people who matter. In that case, the meaningful units we identify are people. In the transcription case, the meaningful units we identify are words, not phones. But there's still an issue here. What language do we use for going deep into meanings? Look at me again. In my Western knowledge practice on the right, I'm asking things like, did you say a T or a D? I want to transcribe this phrase correctly. They made fire. Local knowledge practice is, did you understand this word fire? It has many layers of meaning. Fire is the beginning of life. Let me explain. If I could channel Bulan here today, he might say, why are you more attached to converting talk into text instead of understanding? I think our answer would be that we don't care about understanding so much, or this involves learning and it's too slow. So let's talk about language learning. Here's some quotes from the literature on linguistic fieldwork about language learning. So John Newman and Martha Ratliff, speaking ability contributed greatly to their fieldwork success. Or Daniel Everett, by entering as a learner, a linguist establishes a non-threatening, minimally disruptive social role. Or Bill Samarin, local people may struggle to comprehend a linguist's fascination with a language when the same linguist disavows any interest in learning the language. Or Daniel Everett again, language learning is a natural, enjoyable, and maximally productive way to gain familiarity and understanding of the interactions between different components of the grammar. So this is a role for computation in the course of linguistic fieldwork, supporting language learning by the linguist, e.g. mobile-assisted oral language learning. What might this look like? On the left is what we mostly do, getting a human in the loop on the top to give us some training signal and improve our models. It's all about building machine capacity for language processing. What I'm talking about is on the right. It's all about building human capacity. For example, I might be learning face-to-face with a speaker, and some of their speech is captured by a machine, and I access that later to support my learning. But here's a more interesting example where I simulate a word recognition machine using a flip chart. Thank you to my student, Eric Leferrand, who's in the audience there today for this photo. So people have recorded a story about the green plum dreaming on their voice recorders, and you see at least one voice recorder on the table. My idea in introducing this task was to say, record a story, and then we're going to transcribe it in your exercise books. But they weren't having that. They weren't interested in my transcription task. They weren't interested in that product. They were connected with this task of teaching their children, which means getting the story straight for themselves. So what they did was inscription, writing just enough so they could accurately reproduce the knowledge for their children. So what would happen is they would say a word, that they didn't know how to spell, a word that they wanted to put in their notebooks because it was an important word for retelling this story. They weren't confident with spelling it, and so I had an interactive task with them. But I was simulating an app whose job was basically ASR for isolated words. That's all. It's not trivial because it's a low-density language, morphologically complex. We don't need continuous speech recognition. We just need speaker-independent, isolated word recognition, which I could simulate on the flip chart, and we could do it interactively as a fun activity. And you could see lots of flip chart sheets on the table that they would refer to. So I'm taking the role of the machine in that circle on the previous slide in the top right. I can get back to it. Not sure I can. I'm being that machine with the flip chart and my speech recognition knowledge. And on the bottom, there's those people are teachers. They're also incidentally learners, but they're teachers who are going to be ultimately using this to teach the children. So to wrap up, to date, our work has been centered on linguists or centered on computer scientists. That's not universally true because I know that many of us prioritize local people. But I'm asking how we can make more of this to center the speakers, their interests and aspirations. We can do documentation, capture everything as richly as possible. That supports the local language. But I wonder how well this has been working to sustain language use. The alternative I'm suggesting here in centering the speakers is their aspiration, which is often intergenerational transmission of knowledge, especially ecological knowledge. Can we support them in that? And that often means supporting learners. It sounds radical from field linguistics to language learning, but actually it aligns with the old missionary approach. Missionaries would go into remote indigenous communities and spend a couple of years learning the language first. When we do that type of work, it makes it possible for us to describe a language from inside and ensure that the process is meaningful to local participants. So this is not just better ethically, it's better science, I think. We're still left, though, with studying individual languages rather than studying 1,000 languages at a time. But as I hope we see, if my talk today has resonances, what we can learn from one place maybe has applications in many other places. And I'd love to hear more from you about whether that's true. Thank you very much. So we might have a minute or two for questions, but I'll defer to our chair. Thank you.
Hey, Stephen.
Hello, Eric.
Thank you for your talk. I just wanted to say something. There's maybe a thing I don't agree with about the fact that we build technologies to support the linguists, because I feel like a lot of papers usually self-contained, like they don't necessarily motivate their work, but the work itself is the motivation. We create an LSR system to create an LSR system, not to support the linguists. And another thing is, because I've been in that space, I feel that I didn't necessarily wanted to collect data and annotate data to support the linguist, but more because as an NLP scientist, we need the data to create our systems, and our system, how David said earlier, embedded in other kind of tasks. Basically, we get capabilities. And I remember like a conversation we had with researcher, Jennifer Taylor, who worked in HCI. She was creating this tool, this system to encourage language use. And she told me, how awesome would it be if we had some kind of RSS system inside it, inside the tool I create, but actually we can't because we don't have the data to create the system to create a project that people care about. So I feel we kind of like in a situation in which we want to do ethical work with a community, but neither the scholars all the communities are able or willing to create the data that we need to do meaningful work.
Yes, I see. Which is a little bit like that triangle I mentioned, and you're moving to the right, where, like I talked about, centering the computer scientist, and we disenfranchise the linguist maybe. We just get data directly from speakers if we can, and provide technology back to the speakers. I think that's the position you're advocating. Yeah.
But I mean, we're still in this position, like I don't have like a magic solution to provide the data to provide the system, because no one is willing to do this work.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. We have an addiction to data. It goes without, it's kind of unquestionable assumption in our work. We can't do anything without the data. And I think it's a different talk where I want to challenge the assumption that in order to do something useful, we have to capture the data. In other words, that there's a quid pro quo. We'll give you something so long as you give us data. And that's, let's not just automatically assume that. Thank you. Kat, did you want to?
I think Lane has a question.
You can go ahead. I've already spoken.
No, I didn't have a question. Just was mentioned that you're raising a hand.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I know we're running late, so I'll try to stay very brief, but I absolutely want to completely second where you're at. That idea of building tools to support intergenerational language transmission is exactly where I am trying to go myself. This really resonated, not just because this is a similar path to where I'm seeking, but I'm at a new university now, and one of the new classes that I'm teaching is ethics for computer scientists. And one of the things that, I mean, that I was teaching in class very recently resonates very well with what you were saying here, is in that, I mean, a good test that we can use to see, is our work ethical, is, are we treating people as a means, or are the people the ends? And to me, that seems like a really succinct way of summarizing a lot of the ethical issues that I've been struggling to communicate, and I'm sure you have been as well, in describing centering. Why is it important to center the speakers when we could just be building tools? And for me, that's a really succinct answer, is because it's unethical to use people as a means.
Thank you. We need to talk more. That's anyone else?
Given the initial agenda, we still have like 1 minute before the break, but since it is a break, and if you have a very important questions, please go on here or in chat. But we should probably be slowly wrapping up. Okay, well, I had not a question, but sort of an input, probably you have an opinion or something about it. It turns out that over the past years, the local community speakers become more and more interested in building tools for the web. So they all start using WhatsApp or something, and they get really engaged in the process of, for example, building a keyboard or building, I know, a chatbot for it. So another way of this productive collaboration could be probably building something like that.
Yes, and in fact, this, thanks for that question. This connects to the person who spoke early on about his work in Costa Rica, and I'd love him to get in touch with me. And I think it's maybe a good way to wrap this up is when the locally motivated task is not scientifically interesting, like where's the science in making the keyboard and maintaining it? But actually, at the same time, good science is connected to what local people are doing. It might not be NLP, or maybe it will be. Maybe we can find some NLP in there in the predictive keyboard, for example, or in spelling correction, or in handling orthographic variability. Maybe people don't like to see the text written in a way that reflects the way the language is spoken in the next valley. And so maybe we want that keyboard to recognize the local orthographic variant and help people correct their other words in the direction of their idiolect. Because remember, it's a very Western European thing to have a standardized orthography, and you need an academy or something to establish the standard and maintain it. But when you have dialect variation, it can mean that people have to write in a very abstract way if they don't get to show how they say the word. So, for example, maybe we can find the interesting science inside what local people want, but we have to go with an open mind and ask them, rather than saying, we know what you want, we've got large language models, we've got our latest thing, we need to get publications here. Well, I'll leave that as a challenge. Thank you very much for the chance to share my ideas today and for participating.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Field Matters workshop. So, this recording will be available online after this everything will happen. And I will just give a few introductory words on what the workshop is about and for, and introduce the agenda for today, as well as our great invited speakers. So yeah, well, Field Matters is a workshop on NLP applications for field linguistics. And while NLP folks might sometimes not know, even the fact of the presence of the field linguistics in the world of science, it still has crucial impact on everything that we know about languages and everything that we do with languages. So while fieldwork and computer sciences might be quite different, different fields of science, and at the first glance they could even seem hardly combinable at all. It still seems to be important to know how to apply one of them to benefit in another. And while here you can see like the field linguist doing their typical work. So this field linguist works with, I would say, Mari or something like that. Well, something near that language in the north of Russia. And in the right side, you can see, well, how the computer sciences work typically. Looks like what we are trying to achieve here is to allow for practitioners in fieldwork and in computer science benefit in their fields, benefit in their area of expertise by putting all that we have relevant in the respective area to the stage. So while speaking about field NLP, we could consider several directions on what should be kept in mind and what composes this area. Well, first, of course, when we are talking about the field linguistics, we talk about language documentation. And here is a great, huge room for the automation, because languages documentation still has a lot of routine in itself. And well, while linguists and scientists at all should be doing science, time by time they end up wasting loads of time onto the routine tasks. Field linguistics and field natural language processing is quite about digital preservation, because we are working with a rare and very hardly achievable amounts and like pieces of data. And this data should be, well, of course, keeping in mind all the ethic considerations. Well, this data should be kept findable, accessible, etc., so that others could rely on this data in their studies. Finally, the whole idea of building tools for languages typically concerned by field linguists is, well, quite self-contained, because the setting here is quite challenging. We have very resource-sparse tasks. We have rather opaque knowledge about some mechanisms of the languages that we are working with. We could even not know all the details about these languages that we are trying to build tools for. So the idea of building tools itself, like building typical natural language processing tools themselves, is quite noteworthy. Finally, it is important that, well, while we are concerning the field work, it always brings the community problems here. So we should be working adequately. We should be interacting and probably even contributing to the community of the languages that we are working with. And these could be both non-mainstream languages, such as like under-resourced languages probably, or even the communities related to, I would say, large languages. Still, we have sort of, for example, dialects or separate language groups here. And it is quite important to work with the community of these languages. So I will briefly summarize the 4 keywords that should describe the Field Matters workshop, and then I will present the agenda and we will proceed with our invited talks. So first, well, during the Field Matters workshop, we've spectated that one could build machine translation and language models for our non-mainstream languages. We had a bunch of works on how to automate the field work itself, and we had, like, for example, a work on transcription for field work. There were several papers on lexical semantics, the meaning of words and how they emerge, and identification of borrowings in the under-resourced languages or in the hardly accessible languages. We had even the field work for the mainstream languages. It was English, and still, well, people do field work for English. Finally, time by time, the idea of human in the loop to automate some sort of field work appeared. So this is sort of an umbrella idea that emerged in the various papers that we looked at. And while we've identified these research problems or research directions, by following the final sections of our papers, we could highlight that several actions could be made to advance our field further. First, while we are building scientific products, we still need to package them properly so that other people could work with them. Even like proposing a novel way to automate the field work with a human in the loop process still takes quite an effort to incorporate it in a product. Imagine, for example, bringing new Pythonic feature using deep learning, etc. Imagine bringing this feature into the Fieldworks software. This could be quite challenging. We still should work better and more with the community. And we should solve ethics problems. For example, given the data that is mentioned in the papers, which data sets were licensed and which ones weren't. And finally, this year, several massively multilingual language models, not language, but ASR models emerged. So probably a promising, I would say, like hardware direction is speech. We probably could benefit in ASR and probably even TTS for under-resourced languages, given how fast the advancements in the ASR field are made this year. So today we will have 2 invited talks, and we'll have 2 breaks as well. And the first talk will start just in a minute, and soon after that we'll have another talk. And well, during the main session we will have three papers presented, and during the poster session we'll have 5 papers presented. This will happen mostly in Zoom, and poster session will take its place in the Zoom rooms, so all the posters will be presented at the same time, and you can just jump from one to another by switching the Zoom room. But now let me thank the whole team of Field Matters workshop organizers, and I will do that in the end of this day as well. And also we have several special thanks. First to our invited speakers, Stephen Burt and Antonios Anastasopoulos. And we are very thankful to Eric Leferrand, who helped us with the on-site organization. And we are very thankful to Kat Wilmoa, who made an enormous effort building the community of field and low resource and typology and interested people here, who basically knows everyone here and what everyone does. Now,